My name is Pauline Penrose, although I was Pauline Holmes before I was married. And I was born in Islington, although I lived as a child I lived in North London, Southgate. And I remember the Blitz very clearly, the Battle of Britain. I saw dogfights occasionally overhead, and then I was conscripted into the WAF and started off at Hornchurch in the ops room, but wasn't there long before the ops room was closed down and were all transferred to North Weald.
What were you doing at Hornchurch?
I was a plotter.
And what does that mean?
It means that you used to wear the head. Do you want this recorded?
Yes.
You wore the headphones and you got a table, a plotting table, and you had lots of little arrows of different colours, and every 5 minutes they were changed. You plotted the position of the hostiles and the friendlies, and I didn't do that for long because they knew that I had drawing office experience, and so I was asked to assist the draftsman, who was a great one for playing table tennis if anyone was off duty. So I assisted him for a week, and I was deemed responsible, and he was posted overseas, and I took over all the work of the drawing office. But we weren't there for long when we were transferred to North Weald. The ops room there was a big country house called Blake Hill, away from the airfield for obvious reasons. And it looked like a big country farm. There were cattle grazing in the fields, and our huts were, well, it was called the rockery because we were amongst the trees, so we weren't really noticed from the air. And the rooks used to roost in the tops of the trees. That's why we were called the rockery. And it was very interesting work there. Squadron leader came to see me because the air-sea rescue system wasn't really working very well, and we had a long discussion, and he put through ideas and said, do you think you could do it? And I said, well, I'll have a go. And it was a lot of work because there were two tables, one for the North Sea and one for the English Channel. And they all each had to be calibrated, different colours, red, blue, green and black. Each one had to be separately calibrated round the edge of the table, and there were several stations, and holes were drilled through them, and there was a cord put through with a piece of lead on each end, and when the information came through from a plane that had been downed in the sea, it was all done by triangulation, and eventually it was very successful, and a lot of these were stationed actually near Dover, and it was so useful that eventually the paint was worn off, and I had to go back with my little pots of paint to touch up the wear and tear. And I can remember it was the cherry orchards at the time, and to get fresh fruit was wonderful. I bought a lot of the fruit, ate it all the way back, although I did keep a few for friends. And
when you were at Hornchurch and North Weald, those were frontline fighter stations.
yes.
And do you remember anything about the air crew who were stationed at those stations? Did you have much contact with them?
Yes, I became quite friendly with a Polish pilot, and he told me that his mother and his sister were living in Warsaw. He phoned them up, and a German officer, or German, answered, so he didn't know what had happened. But of course he was posted. I didn't know him for long. The squadrons were changed quite frequently, and I could have mentioned when I was home on leave that, what was it called? A landmine
yeah.
was dropped on the road adjoining our little link road. And first thing I did when I went home was have a hot bath. And this took down 2 houses in the road, and it blew in our front door and smashed the side window on the stairs. And my mother called up to me and said, "Be careful how you come down," because it was all broken glass, and of course the blackout was blown, we couldn't put lights on. So I came down very carefully, wrapped up in a towel, and survived that. But it wasn't a pleasant experience. And one of the houses, the family, of course all the men were away fighting, one of the family had taken refuge under a very thick oak table, and they survived, but the ones in the second house weren't so fortunate, I'm afraid. The house just collapsed round them and they had no protection. But in a way you got used to things like that happening. In wartime it's surprising how quickly you do get adapted, although it's dreadful at the times, and you can't dwell on it because things are happening all the time. Well, going back to D-Day, I was woken very early and asked to go to the intelligence officers, which was overseen by squadron leader Albert Barton. His mother was French, that's why he was called Albert. And we were locked in, and the news came through because I'd already made a map. I'd earlier been asked to make a map of the Normandy coastline with a few relevant towns and villages, and I had to make a lot of little maps, little flags. The larger ones for brigades, or the smaller pennants were for divisions. They were lined, edged in red for the British and blue for the Canadians. And on that first morning, the Canadians took a terrible beating. They were driven back, and because I was having to position these little flags, and although it was exciting to think it might be the ending of the war, there were obviously a lot of casualties. And being on a fighter station, we had Spitfires and Hurricanes, and they were sent up to engage with the enemy or to accompany our bombers going over. So it was a very hectic day. Although we had sandwiches and cups of tea brought in, really we hardly had time to eat anything because there was so much going on. And when night came, we were expected to still be locked in and sleep on camp beds. But being the only woman amongst all these young men, I felt I couldn't do that, and I finally got permission to go back to my bed, obviously promising I would say nothing, and I was back early the next morning. But by then, of course, the news was out, so we all knew that D-Day had taken place. But it was still a very busy day, but exciting too.
Now, moving forward towards the end of the war and VE Day, what are your recollections of VE Day?
Yes, on VE Day, people were out celebrating, but our station we weren't allowed to go out. We had to stay at our positions because they felt that the German Luftwaffe might make a final dash over and empty all their bombs out as the war was over. So really, we were locked in on VE Day. But